Let's discover together the story of wine. I would like to share with you the story of wine. It's really interesting. It goes back 11,000 years to amazing parts of the world. It's all written in a very special book that I studied, and I'd like to share this with you because I think it gives a great overview of wine and the history of wine and why we drink it and why we have it. Probably a lot of people think that wine started in France, more recently since the birth of Christ. But in fact, it's interesting that the first vine seeds were found by archaeologists dating back 10,000 years to China near Hong Kong. And there were never any vines over in Europe. There were never any vines in the Middle East. But through travel and through the church and through settlements and through wars, the vine developed and moved and traveled from China. Apparently a lot of it was to do with the period of Genghis Khan. All of his warriors were constantly drunk. They used the vine for celebration. They used wine with the church in religion. And so as settlements moved across from eastern China across to the Middle East, they developed vineyards and they produced grapes, which produced wine, which produced alcohol. Persia, in fact, in Syria, has vines and grape seeds dating back to the 6,000 years before Christ. And then, of course, again, because of the use of wine in the church and the use of wine in celebrations, the vines were moved and transferred and regrown and replanted and developed down towards southern Europe, where of course they grow extremely well. And in Sicily, 3,000 years before Christ, were the first vine grape seeds found in Europe. Now it's quite interesting how that developed since then. Of course, there isn't so much knowledge about which grapes were grown. They had a very simple way of producing wine, which was simply that you would crush the grapes, you would get the juice, add yeast. The yeast eats up the sugar, it produces alcohol, and you've got something fruity and pretty cheap to make that's alcoholic. But when these vines ended up in the south of Europe and they developed in Greece, which they were also found at this period, they were used for lots of celebrations with the emperors, with the church. Of course, it's part of now the sacristy in the Christian church. And these vines moved up towards Greece and then finally Italy, where Italy, due to their religious and celebrations, they transferred those vines all the way through their empire. So from about 1,000 years before Christ, right up until the fall of the Roman Empire in 500 AD, the Italians moved vines with their soldiers and with their families, and when they marched, they replanted, and they developed vines into Spain. The Italians developed vines up into France and right through the Rhone Valley up to Bordeaux, and they even planted vines in the UK. So they planted vines in Wales, and of course the Roman Empire stopped at Hadrian's Wall, which is the border of England and Scotland, and that's getting pretty cool climate, so I don't think they were really growing many grapes up there, but they were trying to. And in fact in Cheshire and parts of Wales they still have vineyards. So it's a really interesting story about how the vine developed. It's a very good book to read called The Story of Wine. In fact, I don't think it's published anymore, so you have to find an older copy. But it just goes into the history of how wine traveled with us through different parts of the world. Again, mainly to do with celebration, but also to do with the church. The church needs wine. It must have wine, especially recently with the blood of Christ. And in fact, there are lots of pretty interesting stories. One of them being that in Germany, they founded the first sweet wines. There was a monastery where a German monk had to check the vines, had to check the harvest. He couldn't travel to the vineyards. The vines, the grapes stayed on the vines past harvest. They shriveled up. They turned into small golden grapes. He arrived late. They picked the harvest. When they produced this wine, they said it was like liquid gold. This was a late harvest grape. And since then, the Germans have produced these late harvest, very sweet styles of wines. So there's an immense amount of history, which I can't even touch upon in this small article, which goes back to show that wine has been with us for a long time, and in fact started all the way over in eastern China, near Hong Kong. And I hope that's of some interest for you. It sort of might make wine more interesting for you when you drink that. And of course the French more recently, in the past 500 or 600 years, really regulated wine and started to put a lot of effort into making very, very special styles of produce, which then went down to the New World, and it's an ongoing story. Who knows what's going to happen next? But thank you for letting me share the story of wine with you.